For today, let's experiment a bit with the Void trait. Our goal is to make Baron Nashor as strong as possible. There are a lot of different ways to accomplish this, so let's go over everything one by one. Which items can we use to buff Baron Nashor? Since we can't give any items to the Baron, we have to resort to aura items. Here we have Zeke's Herald and Chalice of Power. The first question we have to ask ourselves, do these items even work on the Void spawn? The answer is yes and no. For some reason, they do not work on the first Void spawn, which is the Remura, but both items will in fact work for the Rift Herald and for Baron. But I wouldn't exactly call them equal. Since each star level from a Void unit already grants 25 AP, a Rift Herald, for example, is already running around with several hundreds of AP. The base values for the spell are intentionally kept a bit lower to compensate for this, so you might be better off focusing on attack speed. Baron especially is much more interested in attack speed since he doesn't have a mana bar, and he will in fact cycle through his rotation faster if he has more attack speed. If your goal is to stack Zeke or even Chalice for your Void summon, then chances are you will take Twisted Fate as your legend. This means you will sometimes open with the Prismatic Pandora's box, which gives you a Radiant item. This is quite relevant because the Radiant version of Zeke and Chalice grants you something that is otherwise unobtainable: Omnivamp. If your goal is to create the strongest Nashor possible, then the Radiant version of these items are in fact best in slot. Before we move on to the next part, I also want to quickly go over the Ornn items. Here we have Randuin's Omen and Trickster's Glass. Randuin's Omen is useful because it works the same as Zeke and Chalice, but Trickster Glass is a bit more interesting. Every Void unit and the star level of that Void unit you have on your board will make your summon stronger. Trickster's Glass will create a copy of the holder, so if you give this item to a 3-star Void unit, you create an additional 3-star Void unit that will buff your Void summon. If you want to go crazy with this, you can try to combine What the Forge and Pandora's items, but unless you're doing this in a normal game, I think you're probably dead before you manage to roll all of your items into a Trickster's Glass. Next up, we have to look at Augments. There are a lot of Augments in the game right now that can potentially buff Baron. For example, with the Master Yi legend, we can start with the augment Pumping Up, which grants you stacking attack speed. Sounds perfect, exactly what we need. Does it work? Nope. Okay, what about the augment Unburdened? After all, Baron isn't holding any items. Nope, doesn't work either. Okay, how about All Natural? Long distance spells? Comet Caster? You have my bow? Does anything work? Well, I guess social distancing could give you some AD and AP, but that means sacrificing the Zeke buff, so that would be pointless. You could make a case for healing orbs, but as far as I can tell, we can't use augments to buff Baron in a meaningful way. You are better off using your augments to get yourself Void emblems, because there are units that we can use to buff Baron. One of the best units for this strategy has to be Sona. Even as a 2-star unit, she grants 35% attack speed for 5 seconds, and she's a multicaster, which synergizes nicely with Vel'Koz. In case you're wondering, the attack speed from Sona ult can stack, and the secondary cast from multicaster will have a decreased effect. Giving Sona AP items will only increase her damage, so if you want to buff Baron, then the best choice is to make her cast more often with mana items like Shojin or Blue Buff. Outside of Sona, I can think of 3 units that can buff attack speed. The problem here is, unless you have a second or a third Void emblem, you will have to choose between one of them. Your next best choice is arguably Ionia Rise. He casts a tree in the middle of the board that affects the 5 closest units. If you position Baron near the middle, then he will receive a 50% attack speed buff for a few seconds. Outside of Ionia Rise, we also have Senna, who grants a stacking attack speed buff, and Jace, who is effectively a worse version of Sona. There's also one more unit that we should look at, Aatrox. When Aatrox dies, he will possess the closest ally, granting them bonus HP and, much more importantly, Omnivamp. While Baron has some healing in the second cast of his ability, adding some sustain never hurts. In this fight, we can see that Aatrox dies, with Baron as the only viable target. It doesn't look like Baron received any bonus HP or Omnivamp, and after he dies, there's also no Aatrox returning to the fight. Aatrox just continues to be disappointing. I tried this combo a bit, and while the concept is interesting, I wasn't that impressed, but if you want to give it a shot, then you know what to do. I hope you learned something, and see you next time.